license. Hey, welcome. It's July 28th. It's my pleasure to be here. We haven't been able to talk to you in a couple of weeks, so lots of things have been happening in our community. Tonight, we're going to continue our discussion to talk about race in the city of Murfreesboro. Tonight, we're specifically going to focus on police, but before we do that, I want to talk to you about COVID. We will get back in the next week or so to doing just a sole briefing on COVID, but I want to give you an update. I want to first say before the mass police come out and get the four of us who are here, we are all social distanced. The order that the mayor, Rutherford County Mayor, put in place, the mask order is if you are anticipating being around a large group of people and you cannot social distance, then you need to wear a mask. And so we are all here. We have our masks right here next to us, but we've measured out. We're further than 6 feet away. So I'm not making light of that. We do have lots of things that are going on in our community. We have people who are sick. Fortunately, we're seeing things that are improving in regards to symptoms and things that as more people are testing positive, we're fortunate, we're blessed that we're not seeing people that are getting as sick. So if you have any questions about the mask mandate that was put in place a couple of weeks ago, I said I was just going to talk a couple of minutes on this, but we had lots of discussions on Sunday a couple of weeks before. The governor gave the mayor of Rutherford County or county mayors the ability to be able to put that mask mandate in place. The main question we had is how we're going to enforce that, and there's not a good mechanism to enforce. 2 weeks later, we had lots of different interaction with Murfreesboro Medical Clinic, with St. Thomas Rutherford County Schools, city schools, the local private schools, Middle Tennessee State University, the athletic department. We had lots of really good discussions, and long story short, the mayor's caucus met. We told Mayor Ketchum we'd support him in whatever decision he would make, but that we all felt like, based on the information we were getting from our local people, not from CNN, not from Fox News, not from NPR, we were getting information from our local people. So to be clear to say that this mask thing that we're talking about is not a Republican issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's information we were getting from our local groups that were saying that this is something that as a community that we needed to try. As a matter of fact, the discussion that we had that also came from the governor's office was that if you want to be able to have football season and high school sports and college sports, you need to be able to get this under control. So I can't tell you if wearing a mask helps or it hurts. I'm not a scientist. All I can say is that the people who I respect that are in this community said that anything right now is worth a try. So that's what we're doing. It's tough to wear a mask. I was in a meeting yesterday and was in that meeting for over an hour with a mask, and I get it. It's tough to wear a mask. Had a child at one of my boys' schools passed out yesterday after wearing a mask. So want to make sure that if you're wearing a mask and you can't social distance, find a way to step out and social distance if you're not feeling well. So with that, we're going to move on and talk about some things that are happening in our community. So Dr. Windrow and I had our first conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I think we both could say that having uncomfortable conversations makes you grow. It makes you learn more about one another. And so tonight, I want to introduce, we have Sergeant Bryant Mitchell, who's here. Bryant, how long have you been with the Murfreesboro Police Department?
Over 16 years.
Yeah.
16, a little bit over 16 and a half years.
And before that, you played a little basketball at MTSU, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, all right. And then we have Officer Cormac Chandler. So Cormac, tell us a little bit how long you've been with Murfreesboro.
I've been with Murfreesboro Police Department about 3 years.
All right.
Before that, prior military.
All right. And then Dr. Windrow, how long have you been with Murfreesboro Police Department?
Great question.
Yeah. So and then of course Dr. Windrow has been gracious to spend his time to talk about these, because I think we both want to see discussions that happen in the community that maybe haven't happened before, and that's really what we're going to talk about tonight. We'll try to keep these to 45 minutes to an hour, but there's a lot of things that are going on in the country, really, and even in our community. And one of the things that I have learned, and I try to talk to my boys about this, that making generalizations is never good about what color your skin is, where you're from, or even for that matter, what uniform you wear. And whenever my boys will use words like always and never, I'm like, no, it's not always and it's not never. You know, you have to understand that you can't generalize like that. So as we see things that are going on in our community, I want to first start by saying that this is not a discussion about whether police is good or bad. I think that looking at what we have in our community, I think we have some of the finest men and women in our police department that you can absolutely have. Now, in a organization that has over 300 people, I'm sure that there are lots of individuals who are better than the others. But what organization, if you have a lot of people, are not better than others? But I will tell you, the people who I interact on a daily basis with love Murfreesboro and love the people of Murfreesboro, and they have a tough job. I can say that we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we talk about protests and the things that are happening. I stood on May 31st watching some things that were said to our police officers, that there were white police officers, black police officers, Hispanic police officers, men and women, and they stood there and took those things that were said to them and never moved. So I want to commend y'all for what you did on that weekend. So now what we have to figure out is how we move forward and how we have these meaningful discussions. And the first question I want to ask is, and really direct this to Dr. Windrow. I'm going to do my best not to call you pastor tonight.
That's okay.
What and how do different communities, how do different communities value law enforcement? I mean, as you've seen in the different areas you've been in, I mean, what do you see there?
Well, one, man, thank you so very much for having me. This is super cool, and I think how we began our last discussion was that there is a need for dialogue. There is a need for some of these courageous conversations, because oftentimes if you're not something, then you're not familiar with that something, and sometimes there is no interest to know something about something that you're not, because you're so consumed by being the something who you are, right? And so I think we got out on a great foot last discussion as we began talking about these differences in experiences, how there are biases, and what do we do, and how do we mitigate those biases, and how do we bridge the gap. And so I like the premise for tonight, just like the premise from last time, that we're not debating. We agree that the police force is a noble profession, that it's an honorable profession. To protect and to serve is an honorable thing, and I believe that I can be against police brutality, I can be against police harassment, I can be against police aggressive behavior. I can be against that without being against the police. And so sometimes we see these demonstrations and we say, oh, that's an anti-police demonstration. That's against the police. Well, sometimes it may be, but sometimes, in my view, it's not against the police, but it is against these actions that some of the police officers have taken, not in these isolated incidents that we're talking about now, but for the last 400 years almost, that there have been these instances when black folk have been overly policed. And so I can be for the police, and yet I can be against injustice, inequality, harassment, intimidation. I can be all of those things. And I think we have to give space to people to be that. Right? I don't begrudge you because you have certain privileges. I can dislike the system without disliking you.
Absolutely.
Right? I think you're a good old fella. You've done well by yourself. You know what I mean, Mayor? So just because I may dislike an action or a policy, right, it doesn't mean that I dislike the people. So I try not to be overly aggressive about in these conversations, because one, my wife tells me tone matters, but because I understand that we have to give people space to learn and to grow, even as I want space to learn and to grow. I want to understand, and I want to be understood. And, so, and this is a touchy situation. It is. It's a touchy situation because everyone needs to call on the police. Everyone needs to be able to say, I need to call the police. We need to trust the police, and yet in some communities, people distrust or mistrust the police.
Why do you think that is?
Well, without going into a long history lesson, let's just go back. I'm 54. Let's go back 55 years in March 1965. John Lewis, the great civil rights warrior, representative from Georgia. We have just celebrated his life and his accomplishments and his determination, his persistence, his perseverance. But John Lewis came into the public's view in March of 1965 when he was beaten by police officers, state troopers, law enforcement, right? And so what was he doing? He was protesting for his right to vote, right? And not just John Lewis, but those people were beaten. Who were they beaten by? Police officers. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we'll forget that historically police officers have been the agents of wicked systems, that they have been the agents of policy. They are the ones who have to do the dirty work.
Right.
Right? And so police, they're not a part of legislation. They didn't make the stop and frisk law, right? That's not what they do, but they're called on to carry out these laws, to carry out these policies. And so when we talk about how police officers police, we have to be careful that we don't point the finger at the police officer profession to make the profession to be the bad guy, because it's not. If you took a survey, all communities want law enforcement. All communities want to be safe. There's not a difference between black and white in that regard on that topic. All communities want to be safe, and all communities want to be treated fairly and equally. So that oftentimes is the disconnect, and it's a historical disconnect. It just didn't happen in Minneapolis. It just didn't happen in Louisville. But if you take a historical look at how people in blue and people in black skins, that interaction, sometimes it causes a bruise for a variety of reasons.
Right.
So I think from a historical perspective, that's how. And of course, black folk aren't monolithic, just like white folk aren't.
Yeah.
Right? So all of us don't think the same. Sometimes it crisscrosses generations or professions or socioeconomic levels and all of that, right? But there is, I believe, a consensus between black folk that black folk are treated with less fairness than white folk are. All the national surveys.
Yeah. Brian, 16 years of doing what you've done and now a sergeant, what have you seen, or what are some of the things that in the different communities around Murfreesboro? Because in 16 years, going back, Murfreesboro 16 years ago was 90,000 residents. So since you've been here, it's almost doubled in size.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Well, since I've been working here, I've worked the inner city, as you would call it in Murfreesboro, whatever you call that. Not really inner city, but I work the high crime neighborhoods. And from what I see from people is I'm not wanted in those neighborhoods by the people who don't want me in those neighborhoods. But as I took over the cops unit now, I'm a sergeant over the cops unit, I get phone calls every day while I'm not over there enough. I get phone calls that while I was off for 2 days, everything happened over there, but once I'm there, nothing happens when my unit's over there. So to me, it's the people who don't want me over there are mostly the people who doing something that they don't need to be. When I get the calls from the 60-year-olds, the 55-year-olds who own homes, who scared to come outside their house, who got people posted up in their yard and they'll cuss them out because they don't want to leave. those are the people who I feel like I have to protect over there. Some people, the people who don't want me over there, they may call it harassment because we over there all the time. I mean, you could call it what you want, but it's the people who live there who actually wants me there. I can't help what you don't want if you don't want to go to your neighborhood, because most of the people over there who's hanging out don't actually live over there. So I get it from both ends, but if I'm working at a zone area where I'm working Northwoods or there, it's different. I mean, people want to come out and give me lemonade and water. It's a different in policing in different neighborhoods.
Right.
But in those neighborhoods, to me, like my officers, you got to get out. If you working in my unit, you got to get out. Dialogue, like he said. If they don't know you, they're not gonna trust you. You got to get out, talk to the kids, talk to the people, let them get to know you on a personal level, not just, oh, you over there to take somebody to jail, harass somebody or something like that. So that's what we've been trying to do, interact more with the community and be involved more in the community. My guys get out, they ride bikes, they get out with the kids, we send the groups, we talk, we joke around, but if a crime is committed, they know we're not here there to harm them. We're fair and we're gonna do what we have to do.
I mean, so this is, you asked one of those uncomfortable questions. I said this to Dr. Windrow, you know, after everything happened in Minnesota. I said, look, I'm telling you, I talked to a lot of police officers, and all the police officers were offended because they were saying that's not representative of who I am, and that's not representative of, you know, the profession of police. That's a bad guy.
Yeah.
How have y'all seen, or how do you feel like from police officers that you can break through, you know, just like there's stereotypes for being a white guy, there's stereotypes for being a black guy, there's stereotypes for being a police officer. How are y'all seeing, you know, Cormac, how are y'all seeing that you break through those? I mean, you've talked about being able to trust and interaction, but I mean, how are y'all training people, or how are y'all doing that?
Well, so just like Dr. Windrow said, take that opportunity to have that courageous conversation, but there's always going to be a time and a place to have that. It may not be right away, but we will find time to explain things to you. We are the police. We're a transparent organization. We don't work for some secret society. Everything we do is recorded, documented, reviewed by supervisors, reviewed by the chain of command. There is no room for bad. There really isn't. And having that conversation with somebody you interact with on a patrol level, on a street level, I think those conversations, they do help, because if I make a traffic stop on someone, yes, it's normal for them to be nervous. It's more beneficial for me to find out why. Once I do what I need to do, I can have that conversation with them. Hey, what has your experience been with law enforcement? How did that affect your actions today after I initiated my emergency equipment? And that prepares me better for that next traffic stop I make, for that next person I interact with in the community.
I'm interested to know, following the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, what type of conversations did y'all have regarding that incident and similar incidents?
Conversation with the community?
Between yourselves on the police force?
Oh, I had a meeting the next day with my guys. We didn't agree with it, and that's something that Murfreesboro, we don't take kindly to. I mean, we don't do that. I mean, we're not trained to do that, so that's not something we could do. So I had to meet with my guys, and we walked through the whole thing. That's not something that we do. Everybody understand? Yes, we understand. Like I said, it's just talking. Murfreesboro, one thing about Murfreesboro is we have great training. I mean, and a lot of officers are disciplined, and we're a very transparent department. With the community, with anybody, I know the chief gets personal phone calls from the community, and he takes them and try to solve the problem with the community. Whether he's sitting in a sergeant or captain or lieutenant, it don't matter. He try to solve every problem that comes to his phone. So, like I said, I talk to my officers and more officers who work in our communities about, you know, the situation and let them understand that's not anything we do. And if you get caught doing that, you're going to be liable for it. I mean, we hold our officers accountability, you know, of what they're doing and how they're going out in the streets and their professionalism.
What about the officers who seem to be complicit, who were seeming to be bystanders when that was happening? Is that, did y'all discuss that?
Yes,
How does that take place?
it shouldn't take place. I mean, if the officer is doing wrong, it's on the other officer to step up as a man, as a human being. I mean, that was just wrong. I mean, there's no way around it. And I have the faith in most of our officers. I've seen it where if an officer's a little bit too rough, or another officer steps in and, hey, I got this, or take a time out or whatever, and another officer takes over the situation. And that's why I trust our officers to do the right thing. I'm just speaking on Murfreesboro. I can't speak across the whole nation, you know, but for Murfreesboro, I think all our officers know, and all our officers try to do the right thing.
Yeah, so here's, I mean, and I'll put this back to Pastor Windrow, and that really goes over.
I thought you said you were not going to call me Pastor,
man,
Mayor.
I'm sorry. Dr. Pastor Windrow. How's that? Your Holiness. Why do you think that there's distrust? You know, you've talked about Representative Lewis. You know, even going back, I've watched the 13th documentary, you know, going through even the Museum of the Bible in Washington and going through the exhibit on Dr. King and his letters from Birmingham.
Sure.
And I mean, how do you think that what Bryant's talking about in your communities, but how do you break through that distrust? I mean, where does that start? You know, so say that we've got police officers who want to be able to break that barrier down. Well, it takes two groups to be able to do
Sure.
that. How do we precipitate that? How do we help that happen?
Great answers, by the way, y'all. And great question, Mayor. So one, I think we recognize that there is a history. And there is not just a history of officers doing things, but there's also a history of officers and the police force not doing things, right? So in many cases, especially down south, deep south, black people were subjected to inhumane treatment just trying to be human and trying to be citizens, right? And so in many cases, in those peaceful demonstrations, they were beaten and battered and bruised, taken to jail and beaten and battered and bruised, billy clubbed, held without particular cause. And that's what some of the police officers did because they were agents of that wicked system, right? And then there were police officers who didn't do, who the police force in general, right, did not combat the Ku Klux Klan. It did not combat the white citizens' councils. It did not combat that. So one, they committed injustice. And then secondly, they didn't help to stop injustice from happening. Agents. So before I go on, this is what I would like to share, is that when we look at the demonstrations that go on, and we characterize them, and we say, look at those mobs. Look at those mobs of people. Well, here's the reality. That these two police officers, these two law enforcement professionals that we have with us tonight, again, they don't make policy, they don't make laws. Y'all don't work in the legislation. Y'all are not in the Senate or y'all are not a U.S. representative. You're not. But what happens is y'all become the people who have to enforce sometimes those unjust, unfair laws. So when we talk about the mob, the real mobsters in many cases, Mayor, are the politicians.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Are the politicians. If you just listen now, I am the candidate of law and order. I am going to be tough on crime. Well, no, you're not going to be tough on crime. You're going to go somewhere behind closed doors, and you're going to talk and make these policies and this legislation. The police officers are going to be the ones who have to carry out these unfair laws. And so law and order, tough on crime, we hear it from both sides of the aisle that we're running on this platform. We're going to be really tough on crime. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're not going to be. The politician is not going to be tough on crime, because the politician doesn't have to be on the streets. The politician isn't laying down his or her life in their vocation. They're making laws, creating policies that the law enforcement officers have to carry out. They bear the brunt of unjust laws, not politicians. The worst that happens to them is they get voted out. And the worst thing that happens to us, they stay for a lifetime. So one, we recognize that there is a history, and we recognize that there is a present. And in the present, there are these incidents. And all of them aren't caught on video. All of them aren't caught on Facebook Live. There is still this ongoing tension between the police force and communities of color. Where do we go from here? I don't think it can start after I get pulled over and get a ticket or don't get a ticket, right? It has to start at an earlier age, right? I believe my first encounters with police officers, one was Carl Watkins. Carl Watkins, I believe, helped save my life. As a young cat, he used to see me running around these streets of Murfreesboro, and he said, "Vincent, where you going?" He used to stop. Pull over. "Vincent, where you going?" I was walking, of course. "Vincent, where you going?" And I told him where I was going. But in that moment, I thought he was asking me whose house I was going over, where was I headed. But as I began to get older and mature and become a little wiser, I really think he was asking me, where was I going in life? What was I doing? What was I about to do? Because I was probably getting ready to get into some mischief, right? So I had those interactions with police officers, which helped to inform my thinking regarding them. So I know that police officers, they are part of this honorable profession. But we have to do something earlier. It's too late when we're having this interaction when I'm 15 or 16 or 17 or 28 or 38.
It's funny, I had the discussion, I won't say which one I had it with, but I had one of the boys that got a little lead foot, and so we have the app that tells you how fast they were going. And so we got in this whole discussion the other night on, I don't think it's fair that you're tracking me. And you didn't get tracked when you were my age. And I'm like, well, yeah, I did. I lived in a small town, and it's exactly what you were saying with Officer Watkins, that the communities that we had back then really looked after everyone more than probably what we can now, because we're so much bigger than what we are. So, I mean, do you think, and you guys can...
Let me add something to that. I understand what Pastor Windrow was saying about, back in the day when Captain Watkins was working the street, back in the day, you could have got in trouble from your neighbor. You understand? Because your parents gave your neighbors or whoever saw you doing wrong permission. Hey, if you see my child, you whip his butt and send him home.
Get him.
Back in the day. But this is what we have in today's society is you don't talk to the police. You don't do. So if I ask a kid nowadays, like Captain Watkins asked Pastor Windrow, what are you doing? Why? I don't have to talk to the police. If the police, whatever he says, and he keeps going about his way until he get in trouble, and then he meets Officer Mitchell again. So to bridge that gap, because I think officers in Murfreesboro try to bridge the gap. I see it all the time. Try to talk to people. I don't have to, what you talking to me for? I don't have to talk to you, But we're trying to bridge the gap, trying to make conversation, especially our white officers. It's easy for me to go start a conversation because I know how, because I know the culture. Some people don't know the culture. So they try to bridge the gap, but it's a barrier between them because of all the history, that they don't want to talk to that officer for whatever reason. So sometimes I think, like he's saying, starting earlier, we need more mentors, more meetings with Pastor Windrow's, Pastor Christopher Johnson. We need more mentors like that to have meetings. That way the parents know the officer is not after your child. He's trying to help your child. And sometimes our pastors are the best line of communication towards the community because they know just about everybody goes to these communities because everybody goes to their churches. So I think that's a way that we can sometimes bridge that gap when officers are trying to bridge it and trying to make held conversation, but they're being stopped by the person for not wanting to talk to them.
We have a lot to overcome.
We do.
There is a lot of history to overcome. And once we realize, even with all the history, that we're in this thing together, once every single last one of us understands that we are in this thing together. We're in this city together. We're in this geographical area together. We're in this economy. We are in this thing together. Then how do we draw the circle wide enough to include more people in this pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness? How do we ensure as best as we can that people are treated fairly? I think it speaks to training. Right? I think it speaks to identifying and recruiting and hiring the right type of people that fit the culture, that is progressive and positive and as non-biased as possible, who understand policing from the perspective of the city of Murfreesboro's police force and not some renegade or not someone just raring to be somebody somewhere. But it has to start. I want to say, because I believe all of it starts at home. I do. I believe education starts at home. I believe training for life starts at home. I think for many of us, we've subcontracted or outsourced that out. We've outsourced education. We've outsourced training to the public entities. Yeah. But all of it has to start at home. Here is what I believe many of us have learned or are learning, and where we're learning it from. The TV, man, they used to call it the boob tube when I was growing up, man, because that thing is crazy, man. And it gets into our minds. Those images of police officers beating people of color, the distrust, where do we get it from? We're not born with it. We're not born with it. We get it from our parents in this history that we've been conversing about. We get it from TV, we get it from movies, we get it from social media. And so what we have to do, especially at a young age, because when we're receiving that at a young age, we don't have a filter to say, no, that's not good information. We can't say that because we haven't developed a filter to block those images and block that information. And so what we have to do is continue to invest in the communities, to invest in engagement, right? To invest. Here is one thing that we've done at our church. We've celebrated, 4 or 5 times since we've been here in Murfreesboro in 12, 13 years. We've celebrated black police officers. Why would we do that? Because we want those congregates, we want that community to know that policing is an honorable vocation. It is, man. It is honorable to protect and to serve. And so we've done it for a number of years. We just were granted a charter from Adopt a Cop, so that we'll be praying for those officers in our zone, right? We're working with Chief Bowen on that. Why? Because it makes sense to engage those who are protecting and serving us, and somehow contribute to the collection that this can be a better place, that we can be a better community, and that we can be better people, right? But the community will never be better unless we become better. And I believe one way of becoming better is through having these types of discussions, dialogues, and courageous conversations.
But don't you think that in some sense, we've all gotten lazy from the standpoint that we don't want to listen to others? You know, we live in a community, I don't want to say our community, but we live in a country where no matter, if you watch what TV station you watch, the whole premise is if you don't think like I do, don't smoke or chew or hang out around people who do. I'm not going to hang out with this group. I'm not going to hang out with that group. And even going to some of the things that, I had this conversation with this young lady who she's a freshman at Georgetown, smart young lady. I mean, I felt good about the future generations talking with her, but I see so many people who are getting active on a national level that they want to, do X, Y, Z with this group, but they don't remember that we've got all these things that can be done in your community. I mean, so I get what you're saying about politicians. I mean, that politicians are like diapers. They need to be changed often. But the local level is not like Washington. I mean, we make a decision and we can't go hide behind the Doritos in the aisle at Kroger or Publix because we live here. So the thing that I would want to say when we talk about police officers, you got people like these gentlemen, Pastor Windrow with your church on things, but we've got to have help. And, getting on social media and doing whatever just to make a greater divide, there are ways to get involved in this community.
Sure.
And that means how you support your police officers, but also how you support these kids that need help. So, I mean, that's something I think as a community we're proud of. And I think Brian will tell you this, our SRO positions that we have now are not the position that used to go to the guy who was riding out his last 5 years of retirement. And, I mean, Brian, tell about the people who want to be SROs now.
Oh.
And those are student resource officers that every school has.
Well, the SROs now, like you said, not like it used to be where the guy's about to retire, so our SROs are completely active in the kids' homes, sporting events. They coach these kids. And we have a bunch of young or middle-aged people in the schools now. So it ain't just people just sitting around. Our SRO program is ran by Sergeant Newberg. Who's doing an excellent job. He has these guys really out there in these schools participating and helping these kids in any kind of way. I know a lot of SROs stay after, if parents ain't pick kids up, take them home, make sure they got food. I mean, it's really a good thing right now.
And of course, everybody, has heard of the DARE program, right? School resource officers talk about drugs, don't do drugs. But now it's evolved into something else. It's more so about building character now. And they've even adopted some of the teachings of the Travis Manion Foundation, which focuses on building character, empowering kids to get involved with their communities. That's something, a close friend of mine, Officer Goddard, we travel all the way up to Kentucky. And before COVID hit, we would go speak at schools, 4th grade, 5th grade, all the way through middle school and high school, to teach kids about our experiences, military, law enforcement, learn about theirs, and help build that character.
Amen.
Members of my family may never become police officers, but that doesn't mean that they can't respect police officers, right? Everybody's not going to become a cop. Everybody's not going to become mayor. Everybody's not going to become a whatever I am.
A doctor, pastor. I mean, it's the same thing. Everyone's not going to join the military, but thank God that there are people who do
Absolutely.
those things.
And again, it's a respectable profession. And I think when we celebrate what you two are talking about, those efforts, that intentionality, when we celebrate them. I was in a session with some of the City of Murfreesboro's leaders, executive directors, 3 or 4 months ago. And one of the things I mentioned was that we have to get ahead of the headlines. Because look, we're human. Police officers are human. Firemen are human. People are human, right? Which means we are, at our core, imperfect. So something's going to happen. So you have to get ahead of the headlines. It's public relations 101. Get ahead of the headlines. Talk about what's going on in the community. Celebrate the victories, right? Bring to the forefront those types of activities that are really making a difference as y'all engage the community. As y'all engage those youngsters, they're going to grow up one day. And what they see and experience now will make all the difference in the world as they continue to grow and mature. They won't be 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds forever, right? So if you start at high school, it's too late. I'm not saying you're throwing away your energies, but we have to start sooner, because by the time they get to be 15 and 16, they've already developed perspectives on police officers as well as most everything else. And so there has to be some intentionality to grab them early, even as we continue to engage parents on the police force, why it's necessary, why it's a valuable service to our community. And again, man, if you take a survey of communities of color and the white community, there won't be much difference in terms of how we value the police force. Now, we may view it differently. And that's why, Mayor, in some of those surveys by Pew Research, it's interesting that the white people surveyed have a much higher view of police officers in terms of how the police officers police everyone, right? But a lot of that is based on their experiences, their personal experiences, right? And then they project it onto the experiences of everyone else. And so when something happens, people are, they're shocked. Why? For example, if there is a white police officer that commits this a heinous crime or is involved in some type of police brutality case or incident, they will be shocked. Why? Because that's the wife's husband, the children's father, the church's member, and they don't see any of that when they're interacting with them. And so it's hard for people who haven't experienced what I've been talking about historically. It's hard for people to see that, to have that perspective. But only through what we're doing now, and through people learning and having a desire to learn about what's happening around them, not just what's happening to them, but what's happening around them, can we break down those barriers, I think.
Well, last question I want to ask.
Our time up already?
It is. It
I
goes
thought we had
quick.
just gotten started.
It felt like we did.
And we've got a lot of people who are watching here, so we'll take the last five minutes. That if you have some questions for Officer Chandler, and then also for Officer or Sergeant Mitchell. I don't want to call you Officer Bryant.
Don't demote
And then
him.
Pastor Windrow, we'll answer any questions you have. But so as we talk through these things, part of this is to be able to have uncomfortable discussions, although I don't think we've had any uncomfortableness tonight. I think everybody's come and wanted to be able to really share. But we're going to talk about, Pastor Windrow, or Dr. Windrow, I asked you the question a while back, hey, and I don't want you to answer this now, but as an African American and you see the Confederate flag, how does that make you feel, or what do you see? And I think those are some of the questions that we're going to talk about in the weeks to come. Again, this is just like you told me a couple of weeks ago. Hey, when I say this, I'm not saying Shane, you did this, but at the same time, having that dialogue. So, gentlemen, I appreciate what y'all do. I appreciate how y'all stand in gaps that we don't or have the opportunity to. But I also think that in areas where we can stand in those gaps, that's something that we have to promote much better, that we need to be active.
Absolutely.
So
all of us are better when we're supported by the rest of us, right? That we can help the police force come to be a better police force, right? To help our community to become a safer community, a safer Murfreesboro. Only criminals don't want y'all to be well and to be in certain places.
And, I think from really seeing this over the last 20 years and seeing what y'all deal with, we had a shooting last year that was on Greenland Drive. And I was talking to, it may have been you, Bryant, that when y'all pulled up and y'all said the things that I've seen that have changed, this is not a white issue, this is not a black issue, this is the blatant disregard for life now is so much different than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Well, you don't have to say about Murfreesboro. You're sitting all over the country right now. The massive amount of shootings and violent crimes that we having all over the country right now. I started in 2004, January 2004. As much in 5 or 6 years, I haven't seen as much as I've seen the last 3 or 4 years. It's just picking up all over. I can't explain it. I don't know why it's happening. I just know it's happening. The violent crimes, the kids we're catching out here with guns. 16 and 7-year-olds carrying, 16 to 17-year-olds carrying guns bigger than we have. You know, I don't know what's influencing these kids to do the crimes that they're doing. I wish I knew. Maybe we can get together and help that problem. But I've seen a lot more of violent crimes happening in the last few years than I have in the first 5-6 years of my career.
Well, which I assume that means that when y'all, the thing that made me understand being a police officer a whole lot more that I never understood was sitting down with a group of men and women that said, when y'all leave home, you're on threat level green. You don't think of an issue. When I leave home, I'm on yellow, and then when I get to work, I'm on red the entire time.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I think that, you know, we're partnering with Pastor Windrow to get him more involved, but really to make sure that y'all have the support you need, not only equipment-wise, but, I mean, the mental strain that not only officers but first responders have now is way different than, you know, firefighters now, where they used to respond to fires, they're now coming up on car accidents and shootings and things that they didn't have to deal with. So it's a changing community. When I say community, it's a changing country.
Sure.
I think a lot of what we do, you know, as police officers, we can count on two things when we show up somewhere, whether we are called to the scene or whether we just happen across it. We have to manage expectations and perceptions. So, for example, you know, since April 19th, 2018, I've probably responded to about 5,000 calls for service. So just to put things in perspective. So every opportunity, every call for service, every interaction with the community, it's an opportunity to understand the situation. Even if it's an investigation or somebody is going to be arrested, it's irrelevant because there's still an opportunity to have conversation, to have that understanding. Because just like you were saying earlier, you know, the law is the law, and we don't decide that. We are here to simply enforce it. And I think if the community can understand that it was not written by us, but it does have to be enforced.
Sure.
You know, it will improve those interactions. You know, unfortunately, until we can have those opportunities to have those conversations, that may be the only way people ever receive that kind of information.
What y'all do is so dangerous, right? And because we're human, we are afraid for y'all. Because at any given moment, something terrible can happen to you because you're a police officer, because you are performing your duties, right? Because it's dangerous, right? And you're always, I think, in peril because you don't know how people view you. You don't know what their previous experiences have been with police. You don't know everyone in Murfreesboro. And so there is not that you don't have the relationships that you can put your guard down. You can say, because you're sitting right here next to me with your pistol on you. And so
That's just not at work, though. That's
Right.
just not at work. I mean, I go to Walmart, and you have to literally worry if you're gonna run into into Walmart, and somebody who you had a confrontation with the other day is gonna be in there, and now you have to have while you off duty, minding your own business, not worried about anything but getting your groceries. So it don't matter the Walmart, the bank. I mean, you always on
And it's
high alert.
It's happened before. And, you know, it was funny, Mary, you talked about threat levels. That's exactly what it is. Because you need to leave home at yellow, and when you get to work, you need to be on red so that you can just start over and do it all again the next day. Because you're going to be needed the next day and the next and the next. And for 5 out of 7 days you're working that week, that's how you need to be. And maybe those 2 days off, you can just relax a little bit more. You can go below yellow.
that's why we are afraid for you. And yet, as a black man, and for many black people, we are also afraid of you. right?
I understand.
I would much rather be afraid for you. That's the human response in recognition of the work that you do, the service that you provide, the valuable service that you provide. And we can work on, I believe, that afraid of you piece. And I think that's why we're having
Absolutely.
this conversation and other conversations. And that's why you're doing the work that you do and how you do it, how you engage the community, how you're intentional about talking, how you're intentional about raising your profile, not as someone there to arrest, but that you are a part of the community and a valuable part of the community. So again, thank you for your work.
Amen. I think that's a good point to stop for the night, Dr. Windrow. So we will do this again in 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to do something on updating COVID numbers and really talking about August 3rd is the governor's end of the mask mandate. So we'll see what happens on August 3rd and go through and really have that discussion as well. But Dr. Windrow, Bryant, Officer Chandler, I want to call it Carmick. And let's see, tell me how you came the Carmick name.
So I don't know where my parents got it from, but it's Celtic. I don't want to tell you what it means on TV here. Nah, I'm just kidding. It either means defiant one. Another interpretation was stump-like. I'm only 5'7", so maybe that rings a little more true.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate y'all being here. I was telling Dr. Windrow, like I just called over and talked to Chief Bowen and said, hey, can you send two officers who would like to talk about race in the city? I didn't request anyone, so when I got here tonight, it's really the first. I know I've met Officer Chandler some before, but I mean, these are not scripted. We didn't go over questions. Dr. Windrow and I texted back and forth asking, hey, what do you think on questions?
And that was at 4 o'clock.
Yeah,
Mayor.
that was about 4 o'clock. Yeah, we've had quite a bit going on here, so I appreciate y'all taking part. I appreciate y'all sharing your thoughts, and I think I feel comfortable in saying, on behalf of the residents of Murfreesboro, we appreciate what you do, and not just what you do, what you'll continue to do. So we're going to do our best, as Dr. Windrow said, to not put y'all in positions that you have to enforce things that are not just and that don't reflect well for the people who we are here in Murfreesboro. So that's our commitment to you, and we'll continue to have these discussions on how we can make sure that we're all in this together, and that we all can make Murfreesboro the place that we want to see. And hopefully maybe that's an example that other communities can take from there.
Why not?
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank y'all for tuning in. And we're right at 56 minutes, so we'll be ready for the next time we get together. So thank y'all very much.
Thanks, sir.